Contercast. My name's Kat Boyd, and I'm joined with my lovely co-host, David Jameson.
How's it going? You'll notice the slight hesitation there.
I forgot your name.
Kat forgot my name. Kat in recent months has been suffering from, well,
Motherhood.
Motherhood. Various symptoms of baby brain, post-baby brain, and so on. But I was thinking, I was about, when we were talking about Kat's baby brain, which I also suffer from, but that's, do you know what I mean? That's a permanent, lifelong experience. I was going to say to her, but I thought I'd save it for the recording, that our return after months of being away, it's a wee bit like when you have a heavyweight boxer returning when they're 40 years old to the ring. You know what I mean? Somewhat, mentally not quite where they were, but those are some of my favorite fights. When you've got what's his name, who did the George Foreman, an aged George Foreman coming back and shocking the world with how good he still is when he's about 50 years old, right?
Well, I'm just gonna have to lower your expectations there.
You're not going to be George Foreman.
I'm not going to be George Foreman. I can't remember your name. I don't know who the Prime Minister is anymore, although I'm not sure that makes me different from most of the population.
It certainly, not being able to remember the names of people you've known for many years wouldn't make you that different from like many heavyweight boxers, to be fair.
Yeah, but I've not had head trauma.
Yeah.
No, I've just been slowly suffering from motherhood. Although suffering's not the right word. I've been experiencing the joys of, but also the challenges of, but mostly the joys. Like, I don't really want to do anything apart from like look at my baby.
No, understandable. That's the thing about parenthood that does scare me as a concept, is the sleepless nights. I am someone who does not function at all without sleep.
Well, see, the thing, like, I got really lucky because I do have quite a good sleepy baby. Like, so last night I slept for like 7 hours without waking.
I don't do that,
Do you know what I mean? So that's a miracle. That's amazing. So yeah, I got very lucky with the baby, and when they were giving out the babies.
Yeah.
When the stork was dropping off babies, I got very lucky with my delivery. But yeah, there have been a few sleepless nights, and see, the next day I'm like, it's real madness territory. Like, there's a reason that they use sleep deprivation as a torture tactic.
Yeah.
After 2 days of that, you don't know who you are anymore.
Yeah. You lose all.
I would literally acquiesce to anything.
Yeah. You lose all kind of judgment, don't you?
Yeah. Completely. Everything.
I remember I'm one of these idiots who, like, when I was at university, I didn't sort of do any work on my dissertation till about 2 weeks before I
remember.
Yeah. And I sort of didn't sleep for several days. It's probably my longest period of sleep deprivation to get it done. And the day I went to hand it in, I almost got hit by a car. Because you sort of lose a sense of like where you are and stuff.
Yeah, I've honestly, in the last 12 weeks, I have said and done some of the daftest things, just because I'm like, just because it's a disorientating experience. Do you know what I mean? Suddenly being like, I'm responsible for this like whole little life. But like being dead happy about that as well. I think when I was younger, I always assumed that, motherhood would be this like great burden. That I would like now have a responsibility, and that would be terrible, but it's actually super exciting. And like, it's just so sappy. Like, I'm just a big sap. Like, when I go and wake her up in the morning and I look into her cot and she's like looking back at me like, hey.
And does
I'm
it
like,
put
hey baby.
Does it put things in perspective? Like all the stuff we discuss on this podcast, does it seem well, how does it seem? Does it seem remoter? Does it seem less important? Does it seem like in some ways more important?
A lot of it seems like a lot of the stuff we talk about seems more stupid.
Mm.
Like a lot of it. Like a lot of like there's just a lot that I'm like, this is meaningless, right? But I think this is a more general problem like of the left as a whole, rather than just an observation of like me becoming a ma, is that we tend to think very immediately that where we are is the moment. Like this is the crisis. These are the strikes. This is the movement, right? This is the downfall, like with capital T, capital D, right? Do you know what I mean? We tend to like see like our own part of history as being this really significant moment. Whereas actually, like in the grand scheme of things, these are just other little bumps, bits, changes, turns in a road that's much longer. Do you know what I mean? I think that like we often lack historical perspective. Having a baby gives you some degree of historical perspective, because you look into your baby's eyes and you're like, I have seen eternity. Like that's what it feels like. It's like it's a foreverness, which is very, very odd. It was kind of like doing mushrooms, I guess.
I mean, I always think that, it's that thing of you're doing something that every organism before you in a chain going back millions and millions and millions and millions of years has done. But, all the way back to the primordial gloop, whatever that is, right? I've heard a lot about it, but I've no idea. How does the primordial soup exist under the ocean?
Look,
is the ocean soup at that point?
Right. No, David, do not open this discussion, right? Because I had a very, very idiotic conversation with James about where the primordial ooze came in relation to the dinosaurs, which I am absolutely too embarrassed to reenact.
But anyway,
let's say, so I'm not the person to speak to about that. Remember, like I go to Catholic church. We think the world was like invented 2000 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, you don't believe in the soup. So, but even, it must throw things into perspective to an extent, because, if human civilization is what 10 or 12,000 years old, that's something people have been doing for that entire duration.
Of course,
and there have been plenty of crises and rises and falls and so on for that entire period.
This is what I mean, right? So it's really giving me this like weird historical perspective, which I've spoken to you about before, but like particularly about like the generations of my family and like how that has like how that charts a particular period of social change in history that when you look at from a distance will be like quite a, I think, significant shift in like, do you know what I mean, in the way that one generation has been better off than the other, but it's also an anomaly. So what I mean by that is that like I've been thinking a lot about my family and where my family are from, and like on my dad's side, like being miners, on my mum's side, like Irish immigrants and living in Garngad, like essentially living in slums, and how in the space of 2 generations, well, I mean, here I am in my bougie flat with my baby, and that's quite disorientating, I think, because that's a very, very short period of time. Like the period of time between like my grandfather being born in like the Rose Hall Rose mining cottages, his first memory being the 1926 general strike. How? I mean, that's nothing. Like in terms of historical progression, it's a very short space of time.
It's no time at all. Here's the mad thing is, see, when you were a kid, if your granddad said to you, my first memory was the general strike and that was 1926, right?
I'd be like, what are you talking about?
But also, yeah, you would have thought, what the hell's that means under me? But you also, if you were a bit cognizant of that period, of how long ago that was, you would have thought, yeah, well, of course, because like you're like an ant. Do you know what I mean? Like you're an ancient creature who has come from a completely different time.
That's what I
And
mean.
now,
I would have been like, yeah, but that's like the olden days.
I know. You could have said like, "Oh, I was alive during the French Revolution." You were like, "Yeah, I know. So
Or
what?"
like,
Like,
I once like dipped my foot in the primordial ooze.
yeah. But now that like we are halfway to being the age of our grandparents, you actually realize you actually realize what an incredibly short period of time a lifespan is. Modern industrial capitalism's barely 200 years old.
Yeah,
We
it's
have
nothing.
been alive for a very significant portion of that. For all of the history of capitalism, we have lived
That's why
through a big chunk of
capitalism
it.
is so successful.
Mm.
Because like it is so, it's that thing about like that Zizek talks about before Zizek went all mad and signed that Ukraine letter and shit,
Mhm.
before he shut out his own ideology, he would say that thing about like it's easier to imagine the end of capitalism than it is that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. And that's
And yet
part
it's
of
so
what
new.
makes what
And yet it's so new.
it's so new. It's such
Yeah.
a new thing. Yeah.
But it's also that thing we're always talking about with Christopher Lash and the loss of a sense of historical time.
Yeah. We have
Like
no sense of historical perspective anymore.
none
That's why I
whatsoever.
feel disorientated thinking about like, so my baby is named after someone else in my family who is like my great great aunt, and she lived with my mum. So my mum like lived in a house with someone who like grew up in the 1800s.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, see that idea to me, I'm like, what? You might as well be drawing like cavemen
No, totally.
on the wall.
But that isn't it such an interesting thing that on the one hand we tend to think of our current social arrangement of capitalism as sort of ancient
Mm.
and timeless, and also, as you say, there's a constant thing on the left of this is the vital time. So it's an ancient, it's a system with a very very long lineage, and we happen to be born and live in the speck of time, which is the crucial moment in the development of that entire system. And both of those attitudes are wrong, and they should push in the opposite direction. If you think the system's really old, then you should be doubtful as to whether the part you play in it, in its historical lineage, is the vital one. And yet there's a constant presence of both these ideas. The system is old, I've arrived at its end.
Yeah.
Um, and both of the ideas are kind of fundamentally dodgy. So, I mean, we hosted a talk with Chomsky last night, and I have obviously lots of respect for Chomsky, but he did kind of reiterate some of those ideas that humanity is facing extinction level kind of threats. One being environmental collapse, the other being thermonuclear war. I have to say, in recent months, I'm somewhat more worried about the second one, right? But I just think, over that span of thousands of years of human civilization, human beings have quite consistently predicted the apocalypse. And, it seems to be kind of a mood again. And I just don't know what to make of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is a degree of comfort in asserting your own sense of agency, having arrived at the end of capitalism. Do you know what I mean?
Mm,
Like,
mm,
especially like for some, like being on the far left. Do you know what I mean? It does give you a sense of, yeah, a bit of power. Do you know what I mean? You're in an otherwise like sort of like smudge of nothingness that is time. It gives you a sense of like, well, I've arrived at the end bit. I can force this crisis. I can expose these cracks. And do you know what I mean? There's definitely like, that's part of how I feel about politics, and like a role within it is like, the politics of rupture and exploding those ruptures and things. Where was I going with that thought? All that's stuck in my head, right, is that I saw someone on Twitter, a good friend of ours, referring to Chomsky as fossilized. That's all that's stuck in my head.
I know
That's
how
what
you feel about respect for the elderly as well.
I know. I honestly, I think that's elder abuse.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing that like Chomsky is so old and still going.
I mean, he's dedicated. I mean, you've got to say that for him. I think he's 93, and he's still as eloquent, really, as he's ever been.
Yeah.
Um,
And he's
so
definitely not on those like mad life-preserving shots that clearly Joe Biden is getting.
no, he isn't, and he's all. You know what I mean? It's like I kind of want to know the Noam Chomsky secrets to
Eternal life.
eternal youth. Yeah. Um, I mean, he must. I don't know. I can't imagine he ever went through a bout as Jordan Peterson did of like eating only meat or something and causing a brain meltdown. I'd
Yeah.
love to. I'd love to know what the Chomsky diet is for good
Mm.
brain health.
I have a really sneaking suspicion he probably has an allotment.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think he's a sort of grow your own veg kind of guy.
Spends a lot of time outside.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's also with guys as well who like he's always been slim. And see a thing about, well, we will never know about Abraham Lincoln, right? But certainly Eamon de Valera, he lived to, I think, 93 actually, same age. Eamon de Valera famously barely ate anything. So Abraham Lincoln likewise, and he was famously like full of energy, Abraham Lincoln, and sort of very youthful up until the point when he was shot. But like both of them didn't eat dinner. I
Oh,
think that's a
really?
big one. So Eamon de Valera had a cup of black tea for dinner every day.
This is
Right?
so good. I think for Christmas you should release the Eamon de Valera diet plan.
Yeah.
Like
Um,
I think this is a winner. I think this would sell.
but yeah, I mean, I mean, he was skinny as a rake and relatively like he was in good health until he was in his 90s. I think like Matt, weirdly, I think people eat far too much. I don't know why I'm suddenly.
Wait, I recently introduced James to the concept of mukbang.
Oh man,
Do you know
that's
about that?
grim. That is grim stuff.
Like that is like no wonder people hate the West. It's so disgusting. Like so original for anyone who hasn't heard of this before, basically I'll do my best to explain it through my fuzz. Um Mukbang it started off with a lot of Asian YouTubers who would like do like kind of like talk about the food that they were eating on video. So they would do like a video in a restaurant and they would talk about all the like different flavors and it was all about like regional cuisine. Like it was very popular in South Korea. You would have these YouTubers who would go and they would like try different dishes and they would talk about it. Now, the beauty of the West is that they have taken this idea and they have transformed it into people binge eating like masses of food and live streaming it. So it's like these people just like ramming food, like getting like a massive takeaway, like ordering like two of everything off the menu in McDonald's, like everything huge, like having chicken nuggets like strewn across the floor. Like see, even thinking about it, it makes me sick. I think it's anti-socialist first and foremost. Like there's something
Well,
about it. I'm just like, this is fucking disgusting. It's so decadent and like, oh, it's so undisciplined and just grotesque. And then
have
they
you?
live stream it and then they show it to the world and then people watch it. I mean, I had to
Have,
hang up on someone the other day because they were eating on the phone.
yeah. Um, have you seen the guy? Oh God, I wish I knew his name. Um, he's a guy. He's like an American guy, but he's living. I can't remember if it's Latin America or something like that. He went out there as a really skinny guy.
Is
He's
it
got
Nick Avocado?
yeah.
I can't believe I know that. I cannot believe this is where we've got to in life. That
Uh,
Nick Avocado is taking up space in my tiny brain.
yeah. So this guy explodes from about, I don't know, 100 to 350 pounds in about 2 or 3 years, right? Because he's doing this stuff. He's like 4 or 5 nights a week. He's ordering $300 or $400 worth of junk food, and it's setting it up on a huge table in front of him and just eating it all. And I think he ends up around 360 or something pounds. And like, it's killing him. You can see it's killing him. But the thing is, he's made millions of dollars from it. And he lives in like this luxurious apartment and stuff, because you can make money, you can monetize it. But it's like his addiction to making money is like literally killing him in front of everyone's eyes. Sorry?
He's only 30.
Aye, and he's huge.
Like, so I'm looking him up on the internet just now, right? He describes himself as king of mukbangs, right? He's got 922,000 subscribers on one of his channels. Like on his main channel, he's got millions. Like, and combined 7 million people are subscribed to this channel.
But see, the thing that's mad about this is, like, I mean, I'm guilty as well because I've watched some of these videos, right?
Have you watched it?
I've watched like a couple of the videos to see the phenomenon, right?
And there's a whole like bit on this, which is, there's a video called "Celebrating Our £700 Milestone, McDonald's Mukbang."
See, the mad thing about it is why people are addicted to watching this. It's like a doom view. It's like, it's people are trying to depress themselves to feel something, right? But it's genuinely horrible to watch. It's sort of like you're watching someone, like I say, sort of slowly kill themselves.
Yeah, because the top comment on this £700 milestone McDonald's mukbang, the first comment is, who else comes back annually just to see if this guy is still alive?
Yeah. So then there's loads of famous kind of like quotes under his videos saying things like, "Not much longer now, bro," and all this kind of stuff.
Wait,
so is
he wearing some kind of like device that helps him eat food faster?
No, he wears a thing that helps him breathe.
Whilst he's eating.
So, I've just been shown an image of him. He wears that ostensibly to help him breathe, right?
Whilst he's like eating.
Perhaps, but he's sort of
or is that just a side issue? Is that not like a thing?
He's playing up to it as well. Like, he constantly, with how he titles his videos and so on, he constantly plays up to
3 orange juices.
Stop showing me this guy, is grim. He constantly plays up to the idea that he's dying, and that and because he knows that it attracts more people to come and watch, right? That's how twisted
they're both wearing it.
Yeah, so he has a boyfriend, and his boyfriend has also put on not quite as much weight, but he's still put on a lot of weight through doing all this stuff. I wonder about the dynamics of that relationship.
Do you know what that is? Just like recruitment fodder for like ISIS, surely.
No, but so anyway, I mean, it's like it's hideous. It's hideous to watch that stuff, but yeah. What's weird about that phenomenon is, like, yeah, people are returning time after time to see how bad he's gotten, see how big he's gotten, see how much he's destroyed his life. I can't understand the psychology of the people doing it. They don't seem stupid. In fact, they seem like he's got, that guy himself, Nikado, Avocado, whatever. He seems like a clever businessman. Like, his performances in the videos are quite smart and stuff. He cuts them and stuff in a way that encourages people to keep coming back for more. But it looks like a cycle of addiction that everyone's been kind of dragged into. A bizarre phenomenon.
Do you think it's like, is it the modern day version of like a Victorian freak show?
Yeah, I think so. Except that it's a Victorian freak show in a sense is less like damaging, because okay, you turn up to see that, right? You turn up to gawp at the freaks. And in that sense, you're feeding the industry. That means they travel around the country or whatever. But with this, you're actively involved in the suicide loop. By subscribing to those videos and monetizing them, you're actually encouraging the performance.
Yeah.
You're encouraging these two guys to like incrementally die. So
it's horrible. Like, I find it genuinely disturbing.
it is. It is. And it is. I mean, I'm not one of these sort of fans of, we'll get on social media moderation in a minute, but I'm not one of these big fans of social media moderation. I generally err towards you can't really stop people doing a lot of stuff. Like you need laws around certain things for the sake of having a functioning society. But prohibition sort of generally doesn't work, results in bizarre.
You can't ban. Well,
you can't ban a guy getting fat, right?
But I mean, if I was in charge, whatever I mean by that, I suppose I mean like if, say, I was like a super billionaire with the ability to buy social platforms, what I would ban immediately is people filming themselves eating. Which is like, this is an actual thing that I have. Like, there's a name for this, like, phobia. And it's like, if I hear someone eating like on the phone, or like I see someone like eating on like a Zoom call or something, it honestly is my version of nails down a blackboard. So I don't mind people like doing their mukbangs, getting fat, like doing food reviews, but I think that maybe, I don't know, it should be driven underground and made unattainable by the average internet user.
The thing, I mean, to me, that lifestyle is a nightmare because I'm one of these people, I don't really like other people watching me eat. So to do that,
that's a very 90s thing. It's a very generational thing.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a bit, I always think of that bit from Girl Interrupted, where there's a girl who won't eat in front of people. She'll only eat in her room. And her explanation is like, do you like people watching when you take a shit?
It's a very 90s thing. But apparently the 90s are back.
Yeah.
The 90s body type is back. Thin is back in.
All right, okay.
So, I mean, maybe we could all go on the John McClane diet.
Oh yeah, porridge. Or indeed the Eamon de Valera diet. Black tea.
Porridge, water, and black tea for dinner, a bit of Eamon de Valera. Yeah. So thin is back in, apparently.
Well, don't tell Nikado Avocado. Before we get on to Elon Musk gate, which I am actually, and I don't think it's just a trivial story, I'm actually quite interested in it. But we've been away for a mad bunch of stuff, talking about end times. You know what I mean?
It's mad. So like when I was a kid, my mom had this book. It was like Our Little Girl, and it was a baby book. Did your family have one of these? Where it's like the time you were born. Well, you're a second child, aren't you? You've got an older brother. So I think it's different when you just have one, right? You tend to be like, this.
Got to remember everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, my mom had this book, and it was like, filling out my name. It's got my little like band that I had on my foot in the hospital, like baby Boyd and everything. But then there was a page of like current events, like what are the headlines. So like in my book, it's the miners' strike. I'm born in 85, right? So it's all miners' strike related headlines. And I was thinking like, what am I? Oh, give me 1 second.
Little baby Boydie of 2022 needs winded. No.
I'll edit that bit out.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it's all about the miners' strike. And I was thinking, like, so I've got the same book for Bella. In fact, it's almost identical to the one that my mum had, because my best friend works in a second-hand shop, and someone brought one in. So I was like, amazing. So I've got this like really old-fashioned baby memory book. But I was like, what am I going to write in this? Like, and then I just start thinking about like, what has happened since you were. So first of all, when she's born, there's like, it's during that insane heat wave where everyone is starting to do the world ending, it's too hot, climate crisis bit for a few. There's the RMT strikes are on, like, and it's it's wall to wall coverage. Like, I just remember like coming out of the hospital and being like, just being so disorientated with this like big like wave of industrial action is happening, this heat wave. Then the Queen dies. Then there's Truss. Then she tanks the currency.
Yeah.
And
she gets kicked
oh yeah,
out.
well, first of all, Boris goes. There's the sort of slow explosion of Boris. Yeah. And I'm just like, how am I going to, the box is that size. I'm not going to be able to fit all that in.
Mm-hmm.
My baby's already lived under 3 PMs and 2 monarchs. I think that's more likely to be normal as we go on. Like, that's what I mean, is that period of previous stability for like the kind of boomer generation, for like our generation, like the degree of stability is actually an anomaly.
Yeah.
And then we're more likely to have these kind of like unstable times.
Yeah.
What has happened?
A degree of Italianization, I think. It's like it's like when Sunak came in and the BBC, well, at first the media didn't pay enough attention to the fact that he was our first Asian PM. And then the next day you could tell editors had got a grip of the situation because it was wall to wall Hindu. Do you know what I mean? It was just like wall to wall, our first Asian prime minister. And they realized like editors had come in early in the morning. I mean, if you've ever been in a newsroom, this is sometimes how it happens. Your editor comes in the mornings like that. There's nowhere near enough Asian, right? We need to start pumping out the Asian stuff. Go and find Rishi Sunak's Asian friends. Go and find his Asian auntie. Go and find out where he's been in India. Get me stories, right? And look, everyone's doing Asian today. I want Asian. Like, I'm not going to be out Asian by ITV. I'm not going to be out Asian by The Sun. That's bullshit.
This is why Asian. You can't do satire anymore, because all of this is just too real.
No, absolutely. I mean, that would have been a joke from like The Thick of It or something, 20 years ago. Now, I mean, that is what happened, right? It was like that. But this is the thing, saying, oh, he's so young, he's only 43 or something, and he's Asian. And I just thought, these already sound like congratulations from a much older time. These already sound like really dated. Nobody cares anymore, right? That a politician is gay, a woman, Asian, whatever, right? And, if you were paying attention, you haven't cared for a long time because it doesn't make any difference to anything. But even the pretense feels weak. Even the kind of the feeble media rounds of like, ooh, how far we've come and so on and so forth. Like, it feels antiquated. It feels like something that belongs to the 1990s or something. It feels suddenly ancient to make those sorts of references. But the fact that he's young, the fact that this is much more interesting. He's barely been in Parliament, right? It used to be British prime ministers. You'd expect them to be kicking around in Parliament for 20 years before they got a cabinet post, right? These days, it's not all unusual for people to enter cabinets having been in Parliament for a few years, or even to become prime minister within a few years. That's uncommon in our system. It's not uncommon in some of the European democracies further down the road of decay already, right? So, like, I think we're going to see a more rapid turnover of prime ministers. And I think they're generally going to be younger, less experienced, and like be these sort of, I mean, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, these are people who haven't done much with their lives. Like, and they're both relatively young in terms of the traditions of the country. They're not people who have these kind of long-term memberships. I mean, I think both of them are members of various clubs around London, right? So that's still a thing the British ruling elite does. But it's not like what it was. It's not like you're part of a set who went to Eton, joined the same gentleman's club, you stew in each other's juices, right, for 30 years and then become prime minister, by which point you've worked out your networks, your project, your attitudes, etc. Like, I think that it's a much more kind of like it's a much more improvised, much less there's much less content, much less substance to what's going on here, much more kind of flighty.
No, I agree. It also makes like these characters much harder to control within the party, because part of the function of that, as you so deliciously and delicately put it, stewing in each other's juices for 30 years, like aka Piggate, if anyone remembers David Cameron's Piggate, part of the function of those types of rituals within like elite private schools, gentlemen's clubs, etc., is essentially compromise. Right? Is that I know your secrets and you know my secrets, right? So if you're going to do me in politically, I'm going to do you in. And as soon as you start to like edge out of that, like traditional closed door establishment and into a new type of neoliberal elite establishment, it's much harder to maintain control of these people for the ruling class. Do you know what I mean? Truss was just such an unmitigated disaster. It was actually bordering on enjoyable to watch.
No, what I find fascinating about Truss as well is she's a classic kind of archetype of this new type of politician. No one saw her coming. Now, people say Sunak did. Sunak predicted that her unfunded tax cuts and spending plans, when combined, would lead to panic in the markets. But what I mean is, Sunak didn't see how stupid she was coming. Like, didn't see that she was simply, I mean, she was incompetent, but also that like she had nothing to throw back. I mean, that once the crisis hit, she had no response. She just floated along until she was decanted a couple of weeks later.
Actually, look, there's a video of her that reminded me of the last month of my pregnancy, where I recorded an episode of Undercurrent, which is that show I've been doing on YouTube, and it's on Scottish Independence, right? And like loads of footage had to be cut of me because I'm so pregnant, I'm so swollen, and I'm just so done in. Like this debate is raging amongst the guests around me, and I'm just like hosting it, going like this.
Yeah, just sitting in the middle of this like argument, like a turnip,
like a big potato, right? That's what Liz Truss did.
She potatoed her way through. I mean, there was that.
She was just like, "Oh, that's me done now."
That press conference where she was like, I mean, the big long gaps when she was asked.
God, I love that. Do you know, there's another.
I like that bit where the big long gap and she goes, Robert Peston, like that. You know what I mean?
She does this thing that like I've mastered over the years, which is like when you need to go for a pee and you're out and about, but like there's no public toilets, right? So you have to go into a pub or a cafe. What I do is like I sort of do this like hungry roving eye, pretending that I'm looking for people I know.
Oh yeah.
And I'll be like, and then I just go to the toilet. So I assume that like because I've done this routine, the bar staff are then like, oh, she must be looking for someone or waiting for someone. So then I go to the toilet and then I just come back out and then I go. And that's what Liz Truss was doing at that press conference. She was like so hungrily and desperately looking for a face that she knew.
Yeah.
It was tragic.
Yeah, and
also, that top tip from the Contercast pod for using pub toilets without having to buy anything.
That is good actually. Inspect the tables like you're looking for someone. And the person she eventually found, she couldn't remember didn't know how their name worked. Do you know what I mean? So it became apparent. I mean, I think any remaining hope in her in the Tory party fell apart when she went Peston like that. But yeah, and then the mad thing is, like, this is because I've been watching too much Nakado Avocado, right? I want to see this person explode. I wanted to see Liz Truss come out at number 10. This is how sick, the world has made me. And I wanted to see a break. I wanted to see her I want you to be as humiliated as I would feel in your position. I know, like, there's a performance there. She doesn't want to show you how embarrassed she is. She's trying to protect whatever her post PM career is going to be. You know, her life's not over. She's rich, right? But I actually started watching her. I started to genuinely wonder if it was actually hitting her that hard.
Mm.
I actually thought, because I mean, honestly, I mean, I think that there are politicians who that kind of downfall does hit hard. David Cameron's largely disappeared from public life, and there's very particular circumstances for that. He let Britain leave the EU, and the establishment will never forgive him for that. But David Cameron was in power for like 6 years, right? He was considered a disastrous PM by the end for that reason, right? I mean, in elite circles, I mean, most people don't look at David Cameron and think, wow, what a wonderful PM. I just mean in those kind of media, banking, etc. circuits, right?
He's smooth enough.
He was seen as a failure, put next to Liz Truss. You know what I mean? It's different ballgame. Yeah, I know. But like I didn't get a sense that Liz Truss actually felt humiliated or crushed or disgraced or anything like that. I don't think she does. I think she probably says to herself, I wasn't given a proper run. This isn't really my fault. This is about factional tensions in the Tory party. And I think she'll go off now, and I think she'll make quite a lot of money, which is mad. Is so mad. Like, and I genuinely don't think it's hurt her a more prop too much. You know what I mean? Like, if I was at the center of something like that, I think it would take me a long time to recover. I think it would be a thing where I'd be leaving number 10 and I'd be like, take me to rehab. Do you know? I don't leave me on my own right now.
Yeah, I would be like, I would go straight on a really messy bender.
Yeah.
And like do a beer, shave my head. Like,
yeah. It'd be like a Britney Spears. Like 3 days later, Liz Truss has shaved her head and is smashing a taxi in with a brolly or whatever, right? That would be me. Yeah, I'd shave my head and go crazy. But I don't know. I mean,
either
I think
that or I would do the Father Ted Golden Cleric speech as my resignation. Do you know what I mean? Just throw everybody in, just be like, and now onto the liars.
No, yeah, I mean, imagine, yeah, she comes out, right? She stands at that podium for like 3 hours, giving a non-stop oration, airing everyone's secrets, burning all her bridges, right? They'd eventually drag her away, I think. But no, I mean, she kept her composure, and she's off to make some money. And yet, you know, much like the death of the Queen, I've sort of forgotten all about Liz Truss.
Well, what I could never really quite get right my head round with the Liz Truss. Give me a second. Okay, I'm back.
Thing about Liz Truss, you were saying.
Yeah, like I mean, I just couldn't really work out why they decided to get rid of Johnson. He had it stitched up. He had the whole. I remember when Boris was elected the last time. I remember you and I talking and being like, right, that's it, buckle up, we're in for decades of Tory government. This guy has it like sewn up. It's all like going his way.
Yeah.
There's no way that like someone like Keir Starmer can penetrate this at all. And that's it. We're done. And like I get that he was I get he became a liability and he was an embarrassment for the party and Partygate and all that. And like but I think that the establishment in the Tory party failed to understand that part of his appeal was that he wasn't like a Tory politician.
Yeah.
He wasn't like David Cameron. And it is possible, I think, to survive those types of scandals like Partygate. But what you can't survive destroying the entire currency. You can't survive a graph that shows the pound going like that. You know what I mean? I just feel like what they've given up power just to get rid of Johnson. And I think that like you will see defections to the Labour Party. But I think that I spoke to a former Tory politician on the phone. It was a curious experience for something else that we're working on. And he was basically like, the next prime minister will be Keir Starmer. It will be. And he's sensible. And these are the adults. The adults are back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like that kind of thing. So I think that there will be some defections from like the kind of centre right of the Tory party into the other centre right party.
No, I'm. Yeah, I mean, it very much looks like that right now. I mean, just to reiterate that point about Johnson, I thought he had a lot going for him. He got rid of Corbyn. He had invaded a lot of the Labour's traditional seats. He'd established, I mean, it's overstated somewhat because actually what happened is a lot of Labour voters stopped voting. They didn't all just defect to the Tories. But to some extent, he had created a new kind of class alliance around himself and the concept of getting Brexit done and so on. He'd purged the party of his enemies. And I think most importantly, he'd moved away from some of the more doctrinaire attitudes of the Tories in the past decade. So his levelling up agenda, he was up for greater state involvement and all kinds of stuff that's been completely forgotten now. Like he even had a policy of the state taking shares in sort of businesses of like all sizes, like medium and all sorts. So there was a certain vision. It was very confused. It was never sort of driven through. There was party and establishment resistance to it to an extent, particularly from, like the Treasury and so on. He'd also put his own man in the Treasury, at least that's what I'd thought at the time. So I thought, yeah, the Tories have this decade, right? And it's because, and I was saying at the time, the Tories have this luxury that they don't need to be dogmatic. They can make a turn to a more statist approach if they want, because they have the ear of the business elite. They can make that argument and so on. It's easier for them to do that than it is someone like Corbyn. But they threw it all away. But then maybe that was a misunderstanding on my part of just how volatile the present period is, and that there isn't really this kind of pragmatic path towards a stable political centre, a reorganisation of a stable political centre. So, yeah, and now, I mean, the Tories have thrown it away. I mean, I think they seem exhausted now. Sunak's back with austerity and all the same arguments that we were hearing in 2010 are back in 2022. Like it was yesterday. We can't burden future generations with the debts that we have accumulated. Yeah, but you said that 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And according to you, you've made no progress in 12 years towards reducing the deficit, right? The debt and the deficit. So, and I just don't think it's going to wash a second time. I don't think it's going to work that way. I certainly hope not. But, I mean, the media is pathetic, just relaying all this stuff all over again. That argument. And it's a very strange, it's that thing again about the distortion of time and our perception of time. It's so bizarre to be back here in 2012 again, with that wing of the party in charge again, 2012, 2022. But it's so bizarre 12 years later to have those same arguments back, the same faction back in charge of the country, saying that the country must do exactly the same thing after 12 years of enormous turbulence.
Yeah.
So strange.
And like, remember also like how that period then impacted the independence referendum in Scotland. Because I think that was one of like the biggest driving factors, was this idea of like, there are no alternatives to these austerity programs at Westminster. These are two sides of the same coin. We are now exactly back to that place. The democratic deficit is now even more apparent. I don't know what would happen in the next general election, but hey, isn't it great that we've got an independence referendum in October next year?
No. That is also weird, by the way. I mean, that is also a
the real man. Because see, if I was like a nationalist politician, I would be seizing this opportunity, being like, see, like, here we are, we're back, right? So suddenly a lot of the arguments around, like, if only Labour would return to the left, do you know what I mean? Then that would fix things, right? Labour's had this moment. Corbynism's done. It's gone. It's failed. Like, I don't see anything like that coming back at any time in the near future. We're now in a situation where at Westminster, regardless of who is in power, there is going to be austerity. There is no way that Keir Starmer is not going to like implement the same type of economic policies that the Tories are talking about just now. And if I was a nationalist, I would be using this moment to say, we need independence now. Like, we need to break from the system that is completely riddled with chaos, and we need to, do you know what I mean? And none of that is happening. Like, it's less than a year away.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I think, 11 and a half months. I think it's the 19th. Tell me when the date is for this stupid non-happening referendum again. Is it the 19th of October? Right, well, it's definitely not going to happen. We've been saying that for about 2 years. I take it most people now know this. It's sort of hard to gauge. But I mean, I'll tell you one thing I have noticed. I'm on some sort of like legacy Facebook groups from like 2014. And one of the things that you start to see is like people now saying the secret polls showing that that it's 76% yes, 80% yes, all this kind of stuff. So there's a like, in what remains of the independence movement, I think there's a degree of like detachment from reality of that online section anyway. That's the only way I think at which you can maintain a level of belief that there's an independence referendum on the way, which is that there's a whole world of, I mean, I was told, for example, that Nicola Sturgeon's engaged in secret negotiations to hold a referendum. So it's sort of QAnonymous territory at this point. There's almost sorts of stuff going on that we don't know about, which is going to lead to an independence referendum. That's the last straw. That's the last desperate, attempt to make, to make sense of the idea that there's going to be an independence referendum. For the much wider element of SNP voters, I think it doesn't move beyond the symbolic anymore. Symbolically, we don't like Westminster. The SNP represent our disenfranchisement and our distrust of Westminster. We're going to keep voting for that, but it's very symbolic, and it's very much how people voted Scottish Labour decade after decade, to project to loud hail their disgust at the Conservative Party. And in a sense, I mean, people forget Scottish Labour had a kind of national thing as well. Most Scottish Labour voters, as we found out since the 2014 referendum, very large percentage of them, they are small N nationalists, and they always were. They are people who, voting Scottish Labour, both indicated that they were not part of Tory Britain, but the Britain bit was kind of an important part. They're not part of London, you know what I mean? Not part of Westminster.
I looked at this recently, where I was looking at the Scottish Social Attitude Survey of people who say they're like Scottish and not British, and just charting that over time. And like, ironically, it's at one of its lowest points in 2014. Like, people saying Scottish, not British. It's highest during the Thatcher years. Scottish, not British is highest during the Thatcher years. And I think that that's exactly what you're talking about, is that people who voted Scottish Labour, like that kind of cohort, like anti-Tory sentiment, were still like small N nationalists.
No, absolutely. And that's not a surprising statistic to me. You would feel very Scottish in the Thatcher period because of some of the policies that she pursued, because of the nature, I think, of the impact of deindustrialization on national identification. And it's also, this is part of the problem with national consciousness in Scotland, is that it's fundamentally defensive. It's not offensive. It's not like, it doesn't need to be this thing where you're constantly striking out for national independence and autonomy and a vision of yourself and so on. It can also just be this thing where you define yourself separately. and that's like a defensive mechanism by which you protect yourself from the attacks that your community is under, and so on. Which, you know, has been a strength in times and has also been a really severe weakness for national consciousness. But it does explain how you can have a party in Scotland in power for 15 years, and their supposedly guiding mission has broken down, but they're still cruising along. I mean, their polling position in recent polls, for all that the polls have been crazy and showing the Tories at record lows and so on, haven't budged, right? The surge for Labour would probably mean that if a general election were held tomorrow, the SNP would lose some seats. But that wouldn't necessarily be because their votes would go down dramatically. I mean, they're holding pretty steady. It remains a remarkable phenomenon, and you need a kind of political psychology analysis to understand why that's happening. You can't possibly, and I never see people try and make the claim that the SNP remains popular electorally because it's successful as a party on policy terms or on terms of independence. There's no way you can argue that at this point. Everyone knows the long litany of failures. What they have going for them is that they are the Scotland Party, not necessarily the Independence Party, I have to say at this point. So we're still trapped in that situation. And my enduring feeling has been that that situation will persist until it doesn't, right? Like with Scottish Labour. It persisted decade after decade until all of a sudden, under certain circumstances, and this is the problem though, with an alternative, it's all of a sudden Scottish Labour lost its purpose. There was very little between the politics of Scottish Labour and the SNP. They're very similar to each other, but one of them was tarnished and one of them wasn't. One of them was associated with this national movement that resisted austerity and so on. What displaces the SNP? It's very hard to see because the other Holyrood parties are a complete joke. So yeah, I mean,
the other Holyrood parties are. I mean, well, let's start with the Greens. Have you ever eaten at the Loon Fung?
Oh, this is. I bet their business has gone up.
No, it has, because there are definitely people like on my Instagram stories who are going to the Loon Fung just to say "fuck you, Ross Greer."
Yeah, it's really weird. I don't really understand why so many European Green parties do this, right?
What, the anti-Chinese stuff?
Anti-Chinese, anti-Russia. What is the attract? See, I don't want to say this because it makes you sound like one a kind of 2010s online feminist, right? Of the kind of when people used to write for things like Jezebel and stuff. This is like an article in Jezebel, but like, see with Ross Greer, right, and with figures in like the Jam and Green Party, I can't help but feel there's an element of like frustrated masculinity in all this. Like, I just can't like see it in a different way, because these are guys like, you know, like Ross is like really into like comic books and lightsabers and Warhammer and stuff, right? It's very much this kind of like video game generation radicalization, right? There's a thing he does that I've noticed, and I know a lot of nerdy guys on Twitter do this. Nerdy guys who are really into the war, right? They'll say things like, "Oh, ex-Russian town is a legitimate military target," right? LMT, legitimate military target. They use all this kind of military language, which they've learned from Hollywood films and video games, right? But to discuss a real war where people are actually dying. And they're talking, of course, I mean, so that bridge that links Russia to Crimea that got blown up, right? It's a legitimate military target. What the fuck would you know about that? You're talking about a piece of civilian infrastructure that people drive trucks along, right?
Yeah. This isn't a tabletop board game.
this isn't your fucking space marines, right, on that bridge. This is people, right? And then, of course, what happens after the bridge is bombed is there are retaliatory strikes on Ukrainian cities, right? To see people celebrating. Owen Jones did this. Owen Jones is like that. The bridge is a legitimate military target. Stop treating this like it's a game. It's not a game, right? Yeah. And I do think, see what the Greens are fucking, in Germany, they are so weird, right? They're hyper like pro-military. And they've somehow tried to kind of blend this all in with their environmental, kind of corporate environmentalism thing. I don't get it. Like, why? How is it that people spent a lifetime as hippies, right? And also they're into a bunch of sick stuff, like they're into kind of fields of kind of psychoanalysis, like debased psychoanalysis about how everyone's oppressed and we need to like abolish the family, parents oppress their children. You go from this kind of ultra hippie liberation thing, right, to a veneration of military violence.
Yeah.
It's a very kind of peculiar kind of unity of opposites. Do you know what I mean? You go soy boy hard enough that you start to yarn sort of this kind of like martial culture and stuff. Ross Greer's like, I do enjoy following his tweets for this reason. During the retreat from Afghanistan, which of course, I mean, Graham must be frustrated that he can't be more militarist. And he is actually driving a policy push in the Greens right now to make them more pro-arms industry and stuff, right? But whilst the SNP were calling for troops to remain in Afghanistan, the Greens just didn't say anything, right? Because their instincts, are, I presume, with the SNP in that, they're basically pro like humanitarian intervention, but they're not quite at the place yet where they can say that openly. They can't quite say, yes, war for feminism, right? So instead, what Greer did is he provided a running commentary of various military developments in Afghanistan, where he would sort of big up the warlords behind the puppet government and say, there's this guy Dostum, who's a famous warlord who was part of the like Mujahideen, like back in the day, and it was part of our puppet government that the West established in Afghanistan. And he was like, oh, you know, this guy's serious, he's the business. And then he would like when there was a kind of short-lived resistance to the Taliban in the Panjshir Valley, as there often is, and he was like, oh, you know, don't mess with these guys, this is a serious resistance, talking up all these obscure paramilitary actors in Afghanistan. So that was how he coped with not being able to sort of argue for continued NATO presence in Afghanistan. But I just think it's weird. I mean, it's again, I'm like a 2010s Jezebel feminist in that I'm getting worried about men's online radicalization. Like, I don't know if you've seen this phenomenon. It's called North Atlantic Fellows Organization. So like NATO, but NAFO, right? And it's a bunch of like teenage boys who support Ukraine, but they support NATO, obviously, right? And like they have this thing on Twitter where all their accounts are like little cartoon dogs, and they're doing all this, and there's thousands of them. They're doing all this. They're talking about it like it's a video game. They're talking about, and they're using memes. They'll post videos of people being blown up and stuff, right? Treating it on that level. I mean, I've seen these people. The war in Ukraine has exploded out into a series of peripheral wars. One of which was on the border of Azerbaijan. Hang on, which theatre am I thinking of here? It's led to a series of conflicts, right? And I've seen people posting pictures of like prisoners of war in those sideline conflicts. Like there's been fighting on the border of like Kosovo and Serbia. There's been fighting elsewhere in the kind of Russian periphery. And I'm just thinking, like, why are you a 15-year-old boy with a little cartoon dog in your Twitter profile posting pictures of tortured prisoners of war? I mean, it's mukbang levels of disgusting.
Yeah.
It's worse, obviously, but it's like
it's definitely worse.
it's that same kind of like, I feel like social media has reached a level of that kind of depression spiral where everyone's addicted to it for quite kind of dark reasons.
But like you're talking about video games. This is the thing. Remember that Charlie Brooker like top video game series where he said that Twitter was the #1 video game? Like it's do you know what I mean? It's the most successful game of all time because it has the same elements of like quest that video games have. Which is a nice segue onto our final topic, right? Actually been quite unable to get back into Twitter because I've been like kind of out the loop with what's going on, but I have been compelled by the recent takeover. I made some predictions about that Elon Musk takeover, about how certain people would react to it. And I would just like to take this opportunity to say I was right.
So
Like
you mean
I said that there would be some liberal commentators, I may have mentioned some names, who were like, well, I just won't be giving Elon Musk any of my special takes or content, and I will be moving over to a new platform as soon as possible. And that's exactly what happened. Like, I'm sorry, but that's what the right did when Trump got kicked off. Like they made that other Twitter, like or whatever the fuck it was, not successful. You can't just build a social media platform like that. It's just not how it works.
Of course not. It takes huge investment, knowledge, data. Like, it takes a huge whack of capital. It takes the type of capital that someone like Musk has to make that successful. You can't just go off and freelance it. But yeah, it's telling that it's telling of a certain type of political polarization that people keep trying to do that. Make a left-wing Twitter, make a right-wing Twitter. What's the point? I mean, just on any level.
But the reason people are like obsessed with Twitter is because it's pure aggro as fuck.
I know.
Do you know what I mean? It's like either you're getting like sheer abuse, and on some subconscious level you like it. I'm not saying that people actively enjoy it, but you wouldn't go back for more unless there was some part of your, I know that's very Freudian, but there was some part of your psyche that got a thrill out of it or some kind of enjoyment. Or you're doing passive aggressive, like what's the word for it again? It's not, because on Facebook it's like vague booking, but it's like, do you know what I mean?
Like subtweeting.
Like passive aggressive subtweeting about people in the hope that they'll secretly notice. Or you're like, do you know what I mean? There's like the whole reason for its success is the polarization of it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And that's like when you look at accounts that, you know, are that tweet all the time or get successful, like, I'm sorry, but see if someone right, I get snash on Twitter, I do, right? Not as much as I used to, but like, see if someone had like this is so shitty, this is shite power, I'm really sorry. See if someone had like 10 followers and was like, you're a fucking red Tory scum slag, right? I wouldn't retweet them with like a sort of sassy put down. Do you know what I mean? I'm just like, that just looks fucking manky. Do you know what I mean? First of all, this is someone who has no followers, like they don't use the platform. Do you know what I mean? They're just like firing off bullshit. Like, this is not, it ain't not worth my time. It's not, I just, do you know what I mean? I'm just like, I don't want to, I mean, imagine looking like you cared is the thing. Do you know what I mean? And I just hate all that like sassy put down and like, it drives me nuts. I think it's really embarrassing. I wish people would stop doing it because it gives me secondhand cringe.
I suspect all of us who have used Twitter will feel embarrassed about it in a few years' time. That's my strong suspicion, right? It's one I can't shake. Is this feeling of? I read a really good piece by Sam Chris.
Oh yeah.
On his Substack, where he makes, I think he's going a bit far, but he makes the argument that he thinks basically, he says the internet's going to die, right? I mean, he's a very kind of poetic writer. Maybe he doesn't mean it in the sense that it will literally cease to be there, but it will cease to be the cultural fixation that it has been. I think that is true, if that is the argument. I think that a certain type of literary and conversational and political and cultural life will move off of the internet. And I certainly hope so, right? Because it already feels very degraded. It already feels like it's very exhausted. I mean, Twitter to me, from what I'm looking at, seems exhausted. Like none of the old controversies really incite very much interest anymore. You see new controversies and you just think, I don't care about this. I don't want to get involved in this. I don't want to talk about this. The Musk thing, I mean, on that level, like, I don't think I've tweeted about that, right? And I probably never will, because you're unlikely to find sophisticated or interesting opinions on it. You know what I mean? You just find, like what you're saying, like people going nuts about it. So I've got a few like really crazy trolls, right? Who will one of them.
You do have some like unhinged shit.
Oh man, I mean, some of it has actually been insane recently.
Can I please read out just the text of that fucking tweet that you got?
Yeah.
Right. So this was accompanied by a very disturbing image, which, like, that less said about that, the better.
Yeah.
But it was in response to something quite, like, what was it you were even talking about?
There's a bunch of strange conspiracy theorists who will respond to anything I talk about, right, with their with their own obsessions, with
their hobby horse.
Yeah. Which is a Twitter experience in itself. Do you know what I mean? You'll have loads of people saying like, "Oh, I see you did a tweet about the war there, but how does that relate to drag queen story?" Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's this one like where like someone's commented under your tweet about satanic pedophiles.
I didn't tweet about satanic pedophiles.
No, of course you didn't.
Yeah.
Of course you didn't. You're David. You literally only tweet about war, right?
Not in a sort of it's a legitimate military target sort of way.
No, you're just like all of your tweets are like how dumb the war in Ukraine is and why can't we just end it, right? That's my dumb broad take on like summing up your tweets. Someone tweeted, "Do you even know what's going on, Porky, or did you follow Stasi rule and take bioweapon like good little piggy?"
Good little piggy. I mean, you can almost feel the anger directed at someone who like you never met. Do you know what I mean? Taking the Stasi bioweapon, which I assume is a reference to the vaccine.
It must be the COVID vaccine, but who knows? Who knows?
So no, yeah, I get quite a lot of stuff like that. But that just adds to my general feeling that the medium is in decline. There seems to be a growth in the abundance of people with very strange kind of conspiracy theory type attitudes, expressing them very angrily. But besides that, it's just, I don't know, it looks like a wasteland to me. But into this wasteland has come Elon Musk. Is he the world's richest man?
Like, I think he might be.
He's up there anyway.
In a sense, but like, you know how there's like always people are richer than Elon Musk, but who are too old money to like actually talk about it.
The other thing as well is like, what is
like
this?
Musk is a bit crass, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean the thing about Musk is like he can say he's the richest man in the world, but a lot of that is like prospective wealth.
It's fake money.
Yeah, it's based on like massively overinflated estimations of his various companies, right?
Which have never made a profit.
Yeah. Like Twitter has made a profit, I think, in 1 year since it launched. So he's paid 44 billion for Twitter, which he's had to go into considerable debts to do, right? I mean,
because he's angry at his ex-girlfriend.
Well, so people say, wait, he's bought his favorite medium of communication, and claims he's going to set it free. He's going to stop all the censorship and so on. We'll see what he does with that. Also claimed that he's going to make blue ticks. He's going to charge them $8 or whatever, right? Which is, I mean, it's churlish, but it's quite, you can see why he thinks that's a fun idea.
It's magnificent. I think it's honestly like the funniest idea. And also, like, full disclosure, having a blue tick, right? Do you know, I think that blue ticks became really cringe and really unfashionable about 3 to 4 years ago.
Mm.
And since then, I've been like, how do I get rid of my blue tick?
You got an easy way out.
So now I'm like, praise be, Mr. Musk. Like, I don't want my blue tick anymore because I don't want to look like a right for Jezebel.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't want to look like part of that like liberal commentariat, which is exactly what he's talking about. Obviously, more people than that have blue ticks, but he's deliberately doing this to wind up those people, and I think it's genuinely funny.
Yeah. So the blue tick, as I understand it, in theory, it's to stop people imitating you. And there's
Yeah,
probably some people for whom that makes a certain sense. But a large majority of blue ticks are people with relatively small Twitter accounts who are, say, journalists for a small liberal outlet, right? And
so passive aggressive, so coded, so
what
good.
the blue tick signifies for them is that they're above the herd.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Space.
They're not a normal Twitter account.
Yeah.
In theory, at least, they're famous. They're famous enough. They're a micro celebrity. They're famous enough to need this to
Yeah.
stop people imitating them.
Whereas previously, in defense of the blue tick, like getting a blue tick used to mean that your tweets were amplified.
Oh, right.
So, like when we were doing like radical indie stuff,
Mm.
like someone said to me who was involved in like the press operations, was like, you should try and get a blue tick because that means every time you tweet, it gets like pushed up by the algorithm because
Right.
blue tick accounts are pushed to the front. But that's like the algorithm's changed about like a million times since then, and I don't think that happens anymore. So there was actually like a legitimate purpose in having a blue tick. And if you were a journalist, it meant that your news stories were probably going to get more clicks.
Mm.
It's become like a cultural marker of elitism, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, it obviously is, right? And it's obviously this, and it's hilarious to watch people saying like, "I need this to defend myself from violence." Do you know what I mean? All this stuff, and that's they're already sort of laying out the grounds on which they excuse paying their $8 a month, right? Because the ones who are saying, "I need this because of violence," I need this because I'm going to be subject to some sort of like misogynist attack on Twitter or racist attack or something. They are people who are already preparing their excuses for for buying status, basically on Twitter, right? And these are mostly people for whom $8 a month is nothing anyway, right? Obviously, but because at that point it's explicit. I mean, if you have 10,000 Twitter followers, right, and you're buying a blue tick for your account, it's explicit that you're full of yourself at that point. It could be ignored up to this point, but it can't be ignored beyond that point. So that's obviously what he's done, and he's obviously enjoying that. I think it's almost more about this than it is about raising revenue. On the other hand, he is about to sack loads of people. I mean, as we are recording this, people are getting their letters. He's doing what new owners will very often do in companies which are failing to achieve profitability. The first thing to do is attack your outgoings, and the most important outgoing is paying for labor. So he's sending emails to, I mean, people forget about Elon Musk, by the way, that he was briefly a hero for the left, right? Years and years ago, there was this attitude of like, Elon Musk is a new type of billionaire. He's young, he's, cutting edge, he's a philanthropist, he promised to alleviate world hunger. This, people forget that basically every rich person has said stuff like this at some point. So he was briefly seen as like a different type of billionaire, as new money often is, representing new values or a new trajectory for the system, whatever. That's obviously bollocks, right? He's trying to make Twitter turn a profit by cutting the workforce. In fact, I think he's going to be sued all over the place because he's claim is he's breaking employment law, right? So he's not giving people enough notice and etc. At least that's what the people presenting the lawsuits are claiming. I think there's one going ahead in California already and so on. So, but I do think it's interesting in the sense that this is a very, I mean, there's an open debate about how important something like Twitter is, like to the reproduction of ideas in society. People like to knock it and say it's total nonsense. It's a tiny bubble. It influences nothing but a small layer of people in the world. I think that's true, but I actually think communication within that small layer is important to how society works, how society decides what its ideas are, how it reproduces them. It's an open channel for people. I mean, the biggest kind of chunk of folk in that 10% of users who make up the overwhelming, traffic on Twitter, a big chunk of them are journalists, a big chunk. So it's quite interesting in the sense that it's kind of like a global canteen for people who work in the media industry to come and talk about what their moral attitudes are, their political attitudes are, and how they should be represented in the media. I don't necessarily think that's unimportant to like how ideological reproduction works in the modern social order. So I actually think it's quite interesting that a billionaire who's actually quite hostile to quite a lot of those people has come along and bought up that service and tried to make it profitable. It could actually be quite interesting to see what happens here. I'm not jumping to say he's going to kill it or whatever. The idea as well, by the way, that the new management is much more venal than the old management. As I understand it, some of the biggest like shareholders in Twitter up until now have been like Saudi royals, right?
Really?
Yeah. So if I'm not wrong, I mean, this is another case of us not doing our research, but I think
that's
it might.
why the service is free.
Yes, this is why this service is free. If I know the Vanguard Group has major holdings on Twitter, it may be, I stress, may be the one that has significant oil money. But I do know that there's a lot of Gulf oil money involved in it, and very many, like applications on the internet, popular applications. Oil funds are very heavily invested in all this stuff, and that has a bearing on the politics of the medium. Like, there's a reason why Twitter has an overwhelming kind of Western government bias in how it does politics. It's a reason why, if you work for the BBC, it doesn't say British state media under your profile, the same way it says Iranian state media or Russian state media, including under the names of people, by the way, who are not Russian state media or Iranian state media. They just disagree with the West, right? So, but the reason behind that isn't just that obviously things like Twitter are inevitably regulated by countries like the United States. It's also that the money behind it has distinctive geopolitical interests and so on. So the idea that Musk is, who is himself obviously part of the axis of Western power and so on, is some great new departure, I think is probably nonsense. Whether he'll be competent is anyone's guess, because as we've just said, like, his companies don't have a strong track record of turning profits, just as Twitter doesn't. We live in an era where businessmen of that top flight are not particularly well known for turning profits. Good at attracting investment, not necessarily at producing socially valuable goods for which people are willing to put a company in long-term profitability. So we'll just need to see.
I'm going to tweet Elon Musk and ask him to ban mukbang.
See if he'll ban people stuffing their faces on video. Yeah. Reinforce some girl interrupted level 90s moral and aesthetic values.
I don't know who's sick, me, you, or the rest of the world. Who knows? Just different types of sick, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's all my brain has time for.
Yeah. Okay. It was good to speak to you again.
Yeah.
Let's pod again soon.
Yeah. I'll
try and rebuild your brain over time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I will. I think that I needed to get over this initial hurdle. And yeah, then we'll be on a bit of a roll. I think we should do some kind of Christmas special.
Definitely.
Right, we'll just see how it goes from there.
Okay, sounds good.
Bye. I'm
Bye.
gonna stop this recording.